Hello and welcome to Big Deal. I'm Nisha Poddar, and remember that the concept as well as the use case of beneficial ownership has come to fore once again with the recent proposal by the market regulator Sebi for more ownership disclosures by the foreign portfolio investors. And reports also suggest that the same could be asked of the venture capital as well as the private equity investors. Now, this opens up a fresh round of debate on the concept of beneficial ownership. And to delve deep, I have with me a battery of experts on this particular subject matter. Let me welcome on the show Porus Kaka, senior advocate, and tax expert Ajay Rotti. Gentlemen, so good to have you on Big Deal. Porus Kaka, my first question, looking at these reports at the moment and also the proposal by the market regulator Sebi, in your view, what is the direction that India and the regulators are really taking in seeking more disclosures from the various pockets of foreign investors?
So I think, Nisha, there is globally a far greater move towards transparency, and that is on all sectors. And actually the Financial Action Task Force, the FATF, has been working on beneficial ownership and disclosures for a while. India is sort of moving slightly slower perhaps than other countries, but I think SEBI, as I said, as a regulator, perhaps, and rightly so, wants to know who is the original source of funds of an investing FPI or a venture capital into the country. And I think the reasons would probably be to certainly prevent round tripping and also to ensure that in case there are regulations like Press Note 3, etc., that money from either hostile countries or even promoters' own money doesn't come back routed through an FPI route. So I think that's the concern that perhaps SEBI is having, to ensure that the funds coming in from the FPI are not necessarily from either a prohibited group or perhaps a round tripping by Indians themselves.
Right. So, Porus Kaka, definitely the government is really taking a lead in terms of getting the money trail, and more disclosures is the only answer. But Ajay Rotti, help us understand what in your view is coming out of the industry. Also, we do gather that many of the funds as well as FPIs, and now there are reports that even private equity as well as venture capital could be asked for more disclosures. So many of these funds have an agreement with the shareholders on non-disclosure. Do you think that's going to be a worry, and what is the industry really thinking? Are the foreign investors now a worried lot?
So, Nisha, worried, yes, but not really because of the disclosure. I don't think anybody wants to hide anything or not really participate in any of these, good measures which are there for transparency or disclosure. I think the worry is more on administrative hassles, getting this information as to who will be responsible, how do you do it? Do you do it as like, the depository participants who do it as a part of the KYC process? Where do you bring this in? And also the point that you made on agreements, non-disclosure. If you see even the SEBI discussion paper touches upon this point and actually say, can these agreements be put in place where there is a waiver for all these non-disclosures, etc., in favor of SEBI for disclosing the ultimate beneficial owner? And just based on some of the discussions with people I work with, in some cases, they may not even know who the ultimate beneficiary at this point is. So how do they go and start getting that? It's more of the administrative hassle. It's not really worry about transparency or disclosure. I think everybody sees the need for this. They would want to comply with this, but how do we do it? And they are looking for more guidance on that. And that's where I think most of what SEBI will even hear as comments for this discussion paper will be on those lines itself, in my view.
Right. But Ajay, Porus Kaka mentioned that, trail of money, also to avoid money laundering. That is one of the big reasons why these kind of disclosures are required. But are there some unintended tax impact also because of greater disclosures?
So, the beneficial ownership as a concept has been important, has been relevant for tax for much longer than, just this whole, whether it is for round tripping, whether it is Sebi is looking at it for round tripping, or like Mr. Kaka said about press note 3 as to where the ultimate owner is and controlling those, or it could even be for controlling the public holding limit and the promoter holding limits. But for tax purposes, it's been there for a completely different reason. So from the 70s, OECD and most of the treaties that even India has entered into, or any of the bilateral treaties, have the concept of beneficial ownership built into that. And the heart of the reason is really to avoid a treaty shopping, which is, Nisha, very simply put, you cannot have a provision which permits somebody to interpose an entity in between to take advantage of a particular treaty or a rate available in a treaty. Therefore, all treaty benefits, for instance, are linked to a beneficial owner of that income, and more so in passive incomes like royalty, interest, dividends, etc. So that is a concept which exists in tax, in fact, which is even litigated. Most regulators, not just India, most regulators around the globe look at beneficial ownership as a concept, look at who the beneficial owner is before a tax treaty can be applied. What could be the unintended consequence here? Some of these disclosures today may be available to the tax office, and overzealous tax officer could actually use some of these Sebi disclosures on beneficial ownership to probably look at a tax issue. But in my view, both are sort of two parallel things, may overlap a bit, but not necessarily the same thing and with the same purpose.
All right. When we talk about the purpose, one particular case comes to my mind, the Blackstone case, on which Mr. Porus Kaka had led that particular, legal battle. So, Porus Kaka, what has been the precedent from the High Court on the Blackstone judgment, and what do we make of the concept of beneficial ownership and its usage, especially with regards to the foreign investors in India?
Yes, so I think we should really take off where Ajay left off, and I think it is important to note that Sebi as a regulator and tax as an administrator of tax law have different reasons and objectives when interpreting beneficial ownership. When you look at it from a Sebi point of view, they are looking at it really in the context of who is the ultimate owner, and going back perhaps to the country of source where the funds originally come from. From the tax department's point of view, it's really slightly different. They perhaps know who the owner is, but it is a structuring issue in the sense that there is a step-down subsidiary or an SPV set up in a third country, and the argument of the department is, we know who the ultimate owner is. That is a person situated in country A. You are claiming treaty relief from country B, and you are not the beneficial owner in country B. So it is a slightly different objective, one from a point of view of a regulator. And Ajay is right that when these disclosures are made, and I have seen them in the context of Mauritius, because in the context of Mauritius company, under their company requirements, they are required to disclose beneficial owner, and the department uses that disclosure to hold that the company in Mauritius is not entitled, which is wholly wrong. The beneficial ownership in tax law does not mean ultimate ownership. It merely means that the person who is claiming the right to the income has a domain and has a right to decide where that income goes, and is not merely an agent or a trustee of somebody else.
All right. So that's a very good summation. And Ajay Rotti, you have any thoughts on this? Because in the Blackstone judgment, the High Court held that TRC is sufficient evidence for really claiming the DTA benefits. So here, the tax aspect is out of the way. Probably what the market regulator is more looking at is geography as well as illicit funds. Would you suggest?
Yeah, I think it is there because that's the stated objective even in the discussion paper. They clearly refer to press note 3, they refer to what the minimum holding by the promoter groups have to be and whether somebody is using some of these entities which are so to say opaque without you knowing the ultimate ownership to say cross the thresholds which are prescribed and things like that. I think it's more for that and tax, Mauritius, TRC are two different tracks. Unfortunately, they sort of use the same term and it gets mixed up. And tax department is also known to mix up substance and beneficial ownership, for example. So this is something we'll have to live with.
Yeah, but also the greater disclosures would be in the public domain, and it is always available for the tax authorities to really make use of that in connecting the money trail and also figuring out where the tax benefits are unduly given. So that cannot be ruled out, but there's more to discuss on this particular matter and the various measures that are being taken by the government, as well as the balancing act of getting the FDI funds, but also getting the right kind of funds. We'll discuss all that and more with Porus Kaka and Ajay Rotti right after this short break on Big Deal. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Big Deal and we are discussing the concept of beneficial ownership as Sebi is looking at asking for more disclosures of ownership from the FPIs. A proposal has been rolled out for that, and reports also suggest that same could be asked of the private equity as well as the VC industry. Porus Kaka, we have discussed the reason why the government as well as the regulators would like more disclosures. But how is the world really dealing with the beneficial ownership issue at the moment, and also the disclosures which have been submitted to the regulators? Are they publicly available, and what has been the trend globally which India may also come up with in future?
So I think globally there's a huge debate on whether to make. So most countries are moving slowly, and it's a two-step process, actually one step forward, two steps backward perhaps, of making registers of corporates including their beneficial holdings. And the debate is whether to make these registers public or only available to the government authorities. If you will see the EU, in 2017 it came up with a register of public beneficial ownership. In 2018 it decided to make that register public. However, the Court of Justice of the EU in 2022 held that constituted a violation of the fundamental right to privacy because there was no commensurate interest and any person could request for this register. So again, there has been a slight setback. In UK, there is a register that is supposed to have been made and complied with by January 23. In USA, with some difficulties from some states which have different interests, there is a regulation that may go into effect in January 24. Why do I say may? Because these things get delayed from time to time. Again, FATF is working on various regulations for globally the community, and that may be something which India will ultimately follow. To my knowledge, I do not think India currently has a register. As I said, it's only a paper that goes ahead. And except for the disclosures that are required under the Registrars Act or under the Companies Act of your parent, I don't think the beneficial interest is required to be disclosed currently in India.
All right, but this is a burning debate that is really raging across the world as well, and money trail is one of the big things that all the government would like to really have their handle on. But Ajay Rotti, on the tax aspect, where have we reached in terms of the various amendments to the tax treaty and for treaty shopping to be contained by the Indian government? What are the challenges that we are facing now?
I think we've made significant progress there to plug what I can call treaty shopping. Multiple things, multi-pronged. We've got domestic law. GAR has been introduced. That is general anti-avoidance rules. which again, insist on substance. I'm just oversimplifying it, substance stopping treaty shopping, which is interposing entities which don't have a reason to be there in that structure, other than the fact that they are getting a treaty benefit or a lower rate. Also globally, OECD has been at the forefront on some of these, their best project, which is wage erosion and profit shifting to be avoided. That project has been the one which has been taking the lead on this. And, countries have signed multilateral instruments, and multilateral instruments sit on top of the tax treaties. Again, one of the main objectives there is to ensure that there is no third country which comes in between only for the purpose of obtaining a treaty benefit. So all of these, if you see, are fitting in and are dovetailing into the same aspect, which is sort of taxing the real person, ensuring, and you could call it with different names of beneficial ownership, imposing substance. Some of these are slightly different but have the same objective. So there are multiple things which are happening towards the same goal. And of course, there is our, the Benami Act also has provisions around beneficial ownership and how those have to be disclosed, and the taxability is linked to the beneficial owner and not just the real owner or the legal owner of assets and streams of income.
Right, but GAR, we have taken many measures in terms of also Press Note 3 and Benami Act, amongst others. So, Porus Kaka, do you think that these, efforts by the government are going in the right direction? Because there has to be that support from the other side as well, from the other countries as well. And some of the countries have not been a signatory to many of these measures.
Yes, so I think many countries have not signed the MLI. I think, for example, I think Mauritius is an example. But now with the introduction of GAR, I think the Indian tax department has sufficient ammunition, irrespective of whether you sign an MLI or not, to prevent treaty shopping if it sees so. But again, you must remember that there's a balance, and there are two different regulators with two different interests. For the point of view of Sebi, I think it's a question of where the funds are coming from. Is it from a hostile country? Is it round tripping, etc., etc.? When you come to the perspective of the revenue, again, there is a policy disconnect at the higher levels, because all our tax benefits, if I may call them, whether they were from Mauritius or Singapore, were driven from a policy perspective by the government of that day to encourage investment into India, to bring in foreign funds into India, to ensure that the currency remains stable. And therefore, they balanced it against the capital gains that they were giving up. Now, if the country feels, and again, as I said, this is a policy issue, that they do not feel the need to attract investment, that India as a country is competitive enough, irrespective of whether there's an exemption or not granted from capital gains, then I think there are enough tools outside even the MLI that the government can go. Keep in mind, again, as I said, two different objectives. One from a regulator looking at various other conditions, and from a revenue department that has to balance the revenue loss vis-a-vis the foreign investment coming into India. And again, when you balance this revenue loss, you must remember that when you deal with things like treaty shopping, etc., you have to make a difference between perhaps an FPI and a standalone, maybe a subsidiary or a direct this. So there has to be a balanced look at who is coming into India and do we need these funds coming into India. And if the objective is economic, then you balance it against how competitive India is on the other fronts.
Well, you made a very interesting point, Porus Kaka. It's like India is in itself now very competitive. But we know that the thrust by the government has been on the FDI money. In fact, we as a country, we are banking on the foreign capital to come in for our infrastructure growth and the overall growth and development of the country as well. At a time like this, how do you think the government is going to do the balancing act of still attracting foreign capital, but on the other hand, be very stringent in terms of the measures being taken, as well as getting the right disclosures and excessive disclosures from these funds which are pumping in money into the country?
So they actually have done it. In fact, the government has already made the decision because under our domestic law, they have given a full exemption to sovereign wealth funds who invest in our infrastructure. So the exemption is complete from income and capital gains. So they've already made the decision that these are the kinds of entities that we want. These are the areas that we want to make them invest in. Now, of course, if they want to expand this, they can do it by way of a domestic amendment. They can do it by way of an amendment to the tax treaty, etc. But currently, at least, that where they want to make that exemption, it is even currently existing under our domestic law.
All right. So the government of India has made that decision, and yes, there could be more proposals to this effect coming in from the market regulator. That's what the report suggests. Ajay Rotti as well as Porus Kaka, thanks so much for joining us on this important discussion on beneficial ownership as a concept, as it has come to fore again because of the new developments right now. And people say money has no color, but not so much looks like in the present context for India. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Big Deal. Thanks so much for watching.